Good morning. It's Erev Shabbos. I'm here in New York. Look over the Kinos Hashluchim Ha'ilomi. And some of you, by the time you hear it, it'll be Motzei Shabbos. But meanwhile, wishing you all good Shabbos. I'd like to dedicate this shiur L'zchus Esther Golda Bas Chaya Basya. Should have a refuah shlema, and everything should go in a good way, in a healthy way, and call Yisrael. So let's go through. I'm going to have a bit less than usual, a busy week with the traveling, etc. Let's go through the first question on our list, and that is, having poured hot water from a parev kettle into a steaming pot of chicken soup, does the kettle become meaty? Now, this is something which lechatchila should be avoided. And what you have in front of you on the screen is from a sefer, a contemporary sefer called HaKashrus, written by someone called Rabbi Yaakov Fuchs. And he recommends to avoid it. There is a discussion in Shulchan Aruch in Yeridei Siman Kuf Ches about reicho, about foods being together in the same oven and sharing same smell and the perhaps even a bit of vapor. Generally, the b'diavad, the view is that reicho lav milso, having shared the same smell, does not contaminate the other foods. But meanwhile, lechatchila, there is this concept called nitzok. You may know the word yotzak, which means poured, and nitzok means the stream being poured from one to the other. Now, we understand that the stream is going downstream. Is there also an interaction going upstream? And that's the question of nitzok chibur. Does the lower bowl, the contents of the lower bowl, do they have an effect to contaminate the upper container and its contents? So indeed, in the context of yain nesech, of non-kosher wine, so this is indeed the halacha, that to pour kosher wine into a bowl of non-kosher wine, so then the non-kosher wine will have an effect on the pouring, on the wine being poured, and the wine in the bottle which is being poured from, because of this concept of nitzok chibur. Just compare it to perhaps to electricity, where we do know that the current can travel upstream as well as downstream. Doesn't mean that halacha works in the same rules as electricity, but in the context of yain nesech, non-kosher wine, that is indeed the case, that one should be careful not to pour from, let's say you have a goy who is sitting near you, and you're sharing wine, and for some reason it's not yain mevushal, and you already poured wine into his glass, and now you want to top it up. Well, the wine in the glass of the goy is usur, and now to top it up directly from your bottle does present a problem. It could be done in spurts rather than pouring a direct stream, just to have what's called kiluach hanifzak, that's an interrupted pour. I'm not going to go too much into that area. That wasn't like our question for the moment. But there we do see the concept of nitzok chibur, that the stream is considered a connection between the upper and the lower. Also in Hilchos Pesach, we do see this idea of the downstream causing an effect. So therefore, let's say on Erev Pesach, which would be on Shabbos, so to pour from a Pesach dika pot of soup into chametzdike containers, chametzdike dishes, also raises this problem of nitzuk chibur. Does the chametz status of the dishes, does that have any effect on the pot of soup? So in the context of chametz and in the context of yain nesach, indeed this nitzuk going upstream is indeed regarded as an issue halacha. By contrast, in the case of other isurim, so then nitzuk is generally not considered a problem, and therefore the pouring of from the parev kettle into the hot chicken soup does not make the kettle fleishig. Lechatchila, we avoid this. So lechatchila, we avoid pouring from a kettle into a cup of milk, or etc., because we want to keep our kettles parev. But if it was done, you don't need to kasher anything. So it's a lechatchila, not a b'di'evet. Let's move on to the next question, and that is, Shliach asked me that he has plastic containers, like fridge containers, which were used by goyim for non-kosher food. He now wishes to use them for kosher food. The foods which we're talking about include liquid, both in the past and the present desired use. And the question is, does the cold liquid of the previous use with treif, does that make the containers treif? And therefore, would he need to kasher? So really, I advised him, let's understand this for starters. Let's say a fridge container, we put soup in the fridge or other foods. Although it's generally stored in cold, but it is normal to pour hot food into those containers, leave them to cool off for some time, and then to put them in the fridge. So I wouldn't be so confident to say that these containers were not used with hot food. On the other side of it, it's not so difficult to kasher. You can kasher plastic dishes. If necessary, you can kasher them in boiling water in the same way as you'd kasher metal dishes. So if you need to use them, so kasher them without them. But meanwhile, let's analyze the question and try to give an answer. Where's this question coming from? We all know that when something is cold, food which is cold does not make the keli also. But here, because the non-kosher food had been left in the storage containers for more than 24 hours. So here we come into the concept of kovush kimavusho. That's something which has been soaked for a prolonged period is equivalent to cooking. So what you have on the screen, which we're going to, let's say, read carefully, is in the beginning of Siman Kufhei in Yeridea, where the Taz has a discussion where the kalim will become forbidden through the steeping, the soaking in them for a prolonged period of non-kosher foods. And what you have on the screen is from the Aruch HaShulchan over there in Sif Yud Gimel. So I'm going to read the Aruch HaShulchan straight into English, and he says the following: just like we know that soaking of foods, even as they're cold, there will be interaction. It will be let's say, if you soaked a piece of meat in a bowl of milk, so then, even though they weren't cooked together, but the understanding is that the meat will absorb the milk as if it had been cooked. So if it was just for a minute, you can wash it off. But if the meat had been sitting in the milk for 24 hours, washing off is not going to be good enough. You're going to have to, because we assume that there's been an absorption of milk into the meat similar to the way it would have been through cooking. So he reads further, just like there is the concept of kovush kimavusho with foods, so too with a utensil, with a keli. That if you had taken non-kosher foods with liquid and left them in a keli, in a container for more than 24 hours, then that dish will become also it's contaminated by the non-kosher food. Then what about the other way? You have a non-kosher dish and you left kosher food in it for 24 hours. So I have a tray for keli and I left in that keli, I put in food, not cold kosher food, for 24 hours. So then the keli should make the food also. Now, similarly, he says, if you've left milk for 24 hours in a meaty container, so then that milk would become also, even though it was all cold. Others disagree with this. That when you put kosher food in non-kosher containers, the issue is it has to be considered soaked as if it were cooked. It's only when it's past 24 hours. But by the time 24 hours have elapsed, so then the keli itself, which has an element of isur, but that element of isur is more than 24 hours. And we know that if a keli is not a ben yomoy, if it's non-kosher absorption is more than 24 hours, so then it does not cause an isur. So very, very often people ask a shiur. I made, I cooked, let's say, what they call this, not rogalach, barekas. I warmed up some barekas in a halachic pan, and then I realized that they are cheese barekas. So what's the answer? If the pan had been clean and it hadn't been used for halachic for 24 hours, so those barekas are kosher. Your pan is in trouble because now it's got halachic and milchik in it. And the chatchila, you can't use, should we say, out of date halachic and milchik together. But the actual barekas, they're kosher because the halachic taste in them is more than 24 hours, by which time it would have lost its flavor. So this is where some are poskim are saying it's true that by leaving non-kosher food in a dish, it makes it from 24 hours, will make the dish asur, but by taking a non-kosher dish and putting kosher food in it, when 24 hours have elapsed, where you say, oh, well, that's kovush kimavusha. Well, meanwhile, at the same time, the dish has become 24 hours since it was used for non-kosher or for milchik halachic, whichever it was, and therefore it should not be a problem. Others disagree with this wise solution, and they say no, because it doesn't. Right? They say that it's kind of synchronized. However, they work it out, that it may actually cause it to be a problem. So there we remain that kovush kimavusho. Does a non-kosher container contaminate kosher food by having, because the kosher food was more than 24 hours in the non-kosher container? It's not so straightforward. So b'diavad, certainly there's going to be room to be lenient. But as I've said, that it's plastic containers can be kashered, besides the fact that they're not so expensive to buy dedicated ones. But whatever the situation may be, kashering them is not such a big deal. you prepare a large pot of boiling water, and whilst the water is bubbling, you're going to lower one by one each of those containers into the hot water, and then wash them off with cold water, and they're kosher. Let's go on to our next question, and that is about candles at a chuppah. Okay, so there is the candles at a chuppah is clearly on the level of minhag, and as minhagim go, there may be variations from place to place, subject to the conditions. And I was at a wedding on Monday here in New York, and the layout, the way things are operate over here, is that the people want to have the chuppah in front of 770, but there's no hall, which is a suitable hall right nearby. It's across the street, or some use a further hall. So what's going to be done is they can have Kabbalah's ponim. The reception for the Chosson is held in the hall, and in an adjacent room there will be what's the Kabbalah's Pnei Kalloh, where the Badeken will take place, and at the end of the Kabbalah's ponim, when the Chosson has said when the read the Tnoim and the broken the plate, and then the Chosson has recited the Maimer, then the Chosson is led by the Unterfirers, by the Mechutonim usually, and goes over to the Kala and puts the cloth over her face and over her head, and then the Chosson proceeds to the Chupah. Now, in this particular chasana, which I was involved with, so the father of the Kala took candles from the Kabbalah's ponim and gave candles to each of the Unterfirers, of the menfolk, and they proceeded to the Kala, each one holding a candle. The local people here in New York were quite surprised. And what's this? You go to Badeken with candles, and apparently that's not the done thing here. They only will put candles in operation once they've come across the street to 770. As the Chosson is going to be led to the Chupah, that's when they'll give candles. I guess similar with the ladies, with the Kala. So I just want to explore this minhag of candles by a Chupah. And as I say, minhagim can vary from place to place. That's legitimate. But let's look at this minhag. Now, what we have in front of us is the Sefer Matei Moshe, who is a Talmud of the Marshal. So probably in the region of 400 years ago. And he lists minhagim, and he says, V'yesh mekoymes, I was talking about at the Chupah, Yesh mekoymes that shkolach shayochim bo noisem neiris harbe lefana. There are places that there's many people who are all the affiliated people will carry candles, which may also be supportive of the minhag Chabad. Practically, it's not on record, but that's the reality, how the Mechutonim, also grandparents, will also join in the procession going around the Chosson under the Chupah. I've seen that even by very prominent Rav Chabad. I remember Moshe Lando, Alav Shalom, at a Chosson of his granddaughter, and he was very struggling with walking, and with tremendous effort, he insisted on going around the Chupah. And later he commented he had this opportunity to reconnect with his father, Alav Shalom, because as we know, under the Chupah, the previous generations come, and so. But I just, the person I respect very, very much, and he took this very seriously of going around the Chupah, even though it was an enical, not his child. He wasn't a direct Unterfirer. So All right, so then you have sometimes, and Baruch Hashem, you've got grandparents and lots of candles. Fine. So we have already Mati Moshe, Kol Asher Yochim Bo, Noisim Neiros Harbe. Then he says, Yesh Mekomis, it's only the Shnei Shvinin. And I think he's talking only about the male Unterfirers, that each one has got one candle. So we've got two candles. And he suggests the following reason. In the Gemara, in the Mishnah in Oholus, it lists the number of organs in the human body and how a man has got 248 limbs in his body. In this context, the definition of a limb means bone, meat, and flesh and sinews. So the Mishnah there says in the hand there are 30 Avarim. So the hand has got, in the fingers alone, you've got 14 joints. And that's the mispar of the word yad. But including the bones within the palm, etc., there's a number of 30, and well, same thing in the feet, 30, and so on. So in total, the Mishnah lists 248. So this is also interesting that kidneys and heart and lungs and etc., those, your tongue, they're not counted in the 248 organs because they don't have bones. So that's very interesting. When you make a mishaberach, you say l'ramachi boro, and unfortunately, many times the problem which the person is suffering from is not in the ramach evarim, it's the what we call evarim apnimiyim. It's the inner organs, vital organs, etc. But that's the another discussion. Meanwhile, so a male has, in the male body, there's 248 limbs. A woman, the body of a woman is slightly different, and as a result, there's two opinions. It's 251 or 252, but be that as it may, the combination of 252 and 248 equals 500. The word neir is 250. Two candles is 500. So this is the remez of having two candles under the chuppah, leading to the chuppah, and that is corresponding to the male and the female, which this gematria, by the way, is also brought in Shulchan Aruch in Reish Samach Gimel, somewhere around there, about the minhag of lighting Shabbos candles. That a married woman will light a minimum of 2 candles, and that is one reason for that is given of Zocher v'Shomer, as in the story in Gemara Shabbos, with the man running Erev Shabbos with 2 twigs of hodos, and he said, and he was asked by Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, why do you need 2? He said, what do you mean? One for Zocher, one for Shomer. Then the other reason brought in Shulchan Aruch is male and female together. You got the gematria of 500, and 2 neiros is 500, and then he brings another nice thing that here that the 200 for that pru or revu also equals to the number of 500, and the chasna is obviously with giving the bracha that they should have children and be multiply. So that's the background for the minhag of having 2 candles. Now, does it do any harm to have more than 2 candles? So you can look in Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch and Sibirei Samach Gimel, and he says, because the Rosh, that although you have something which has been established because of a particular number or relating to it, has a remez to a particular number, it doesn't do harm to add to that. The proof to that is the Gemara in Megillah talks about why we have 5 aliyahs on Yom Tov and 6 aliyahs on Yom Kippur and 7 aliyahs on Shabbos. But then it's permitted to add to the number. Chabad don't do it, but there is in Halocho, certainly you can do Heshafas. So it's the fact that you add to the number of items, even though there was a specific number, that doesn't detract from the remez value of the minimum number of that minhag. Okay. So this is a bit of background about the general custom of carrying candles to the Chupah. Now, coming back to the question, should the candles be used at the Badeken? So elsewhere, we certainly in Chutzlah, in other what I've seen, we do to go to Badeken. And just to clarify a point here, the poskim, there's a word Chupah, and Chupah is should we say, an instrument, a vehicle to transform the relationship between Chosson and Kalloh from what's called erusin, betrothal, to nisuin, to become fully married. And that's got bearings la halacha. That's also the question of whether she has to wear her hair covered, from what point. So Chupah, there's what you have kiddushin would be the betrothal, and nisuin would be consummation of the marriage in a legal sense. Under the Chupah, we have two sections. We have the first part, which is the kiddushin. The rabbi says the bracha, and that's done because sometimes the Chosson struggles with the Hebrew. So the rabbi says the bracha. So to be a Masada kiddushin, at least you have to know how to read Hebrew without making mistakes. Then the Chosson says harayat and puts the ring. Then the ksubah is read, and then is the next set of brachas, 7 brachas, and those are formalizing the nisuin. That is really because there's a Chupah. But what exactly is this Chupah? So there are actually 4 or 5 different understandings in poskim what exactly the Chupah is. Some say it's the canopy, some say it's the yichud room, some say it's well, one of the opinions is that when the Chosson covers the Kalloh with a cloth. As if you remember the pasuk in Rus, for us toknofecho ala mosecho. So there is an opinion that the Badeken is actually the instrument, vehicle, which makes the Chupah be Chupah. Although they say there is afterwards the kedushin is done, and it doesn't matter. There has to be at some stage this inyan of Chupah. So that's, by the way, if you notice, I mentioned before that the Chosson covers the face and the head of the Kalloh. And the reason why I'm emphasizing this is because it's not the Badeken is not just that her face should be covered under the Chupah, which there's reasons for that, but the Badeken is also by basically a statement that till now, as a unmarried girl, you've been wearing your own hair, exposing your own hair. Now that you're married, so your hair will be covered because you'll be married. And so this is the Badeken is a statement of now we're getting married, and it's going to be a new relationship here, which is parenthetically the reason why at a second marriage, if the woman has been married before, there is no need and that the Chosson should cover the Kalloh. And there's actually no need for the Kalloh to have a face covered, although usually by second weddings, the Kallohs do cover their face, but that's more for their own choice, perhaps feeling of privacy, etc. So to summarize this point, since the Badeken is already the first instrument of the Chupah, it makes sense that the should we say, the seriousness and therefore the accompanying with the candles, this is actually going to the Chupah. That's how I feel. It's time we go into high gear when we go to the Badeken, and so we go with the candles, and that's when the fathers will give a bracha to the Kalloh. The fact that in New York it's impractical, okay, that's a question on its own, but there is certainly a value for the minhag of going to the Badeken with the candles, ready and gearing up to this very special moment of the Badeken, which is the beginning of the Chupah. A separate question is, until what point should the candles be left alight? We all understand that to stand there holding a candle for 20 minutes may not always be so comfortable. The late Rabbi Sin Haknallah Shalom would insist that the candles are left alight all the way till the end of the Chupah. I remember he showed me some source for this whilst I'm traveling, etc. I haven't located that source, but I remember there was basis for this, and I know in some places that as soon as you finish your 7 circuits, then someone takes away the candles. Could be, listen, if there's some people who are frail, elders, grandparents, they can't handle it, but it is nicer that the candles should remain there in alight throughout the Chupah. In addition to, sometimes the Chuppahs are in the evening and there's not necessarily so much light, so they do add to the atmosphere of the Chupah. So there is value in leaving them on alight until the end of the Chupah, just once we finish the 7th bracha, and the Chosson was gearing up with, take the glass and we start wrapping it up for the Chosson to break. And that's certainly a point where the candles should be taken away from the Unterfirers, etc. Because right after that, there's going to be a whole crush and the mazel tovs, etc. So you don't need the candles in the way at that point. Let's move on to our next question. Someone writes to me that he was present at a Shiva house, and as is common in some parts of the world, that you have 2 rooms in the house, 2 reception rooms, one used as a lounge and the other used as a dining area, and there's doors connecting the 2. So you've got a larger area, and someone's at this tefillah was saying, no, they have to have all the men, or 10 men have to be in the same room, where the chazan, 9 men and the chazan should be in the same room. That is 2 separate rooms presents a problem. So he asked for clarification. So let's read. This is from Simon Nunhei in Orach Chaim. Now, the structure of Orach Chaim talks about getting up in the morning, then talks about tzitzis, then talks about tefillin, Berchas HaShachar, and then leading up to Yishtabach. That's when you'll need to have a minyan for Kaddish at Yishtabach. We're talking about Minadin. Well, of course, we know that Friedrich Rebbe encouraged them to upkeep the minig of saying Kaddish before Hoidu. Mentioned that last week. But Minadin, the first Kaddish comes in by Yishtabach. So that's where in Simon Nun Hey, talking about the need of a minyan and that what constitutes that the minyan have been duly formed. So, Sif Tesvav. Soroh shiur kol ha'asora b'mokim echad u'shliach tzibur imayim. The 10 men of the minyan need to be in one space together with the chazan. Aval im miksosim b'cheder zeh or miksosim b'cheder zeh. If some of the minyan are in one room and some of them are in the other room, einam mitztorfim, they will not combine to constitute a minyan. Even though there is a doorway between the 2 rooms. Even let's say you got 6 or 7 in the shul, and you've got another 3 in the forecourt of the shul. Those 3 people will not be drawn to as if to make up the minyan. So here we have the idea that a space kind of defines its contents to be a unit, and therefore when there's 2 spaces, 2 rooms, they are in separate spaces, and therefore they're separate units. I want to just point out here for a moment that if the doorway had been more than 10 amos wide, then this would not be an issue, because you have in Hilchos Shabbos, if you have a doorway, a gap, which is more than 10 amos wide, that is considered a porod's bimeloy l'reshus harabim. It's no longer considered a doorway, it's considered totally exposed. So we can use the same concept here. Sometimes you have shtibelach but there is a house which has been refurbished, and they made a through lounge into one large room. So if that gap is more than 10 amas, which is about 5 meters or 15 feet, then you wouldn't have to worry about it. It's all considered like one large room. But in the more typical domestic situation, this does become an issue of the two separate rooms being separate units. I've skipped some of the hemshech of Siftez Vov, but let's go now to Siftez Zayin. This which we say, that the outsiders do not make up the minyan on the inside, is only if they are not visible to the insiders. Let's say it's an L-shaped area or something like that, where they're not necessarily visible. But if the outsider is showing his face to the insiders, even if he's at the back of the shul and is just peeping through a window, even if this is several floors up, and even if that window is less than 4 tefachim wide, those who've been keeping up with this shiur from COVID times, from the beginning of COVID times, this became quite an issue. It was relevant of combining people for a minyan from balconies, etc. So back to the current question: do people in the lounge combine to the people in the dining room? So if they are mariponim, if they're looking in that direction, then they are mitzaref. If they're looking the other way, they're not mitzaref. So yeah, that's more or less the answer. And then the details are: what does it mean? Does it have to look, face, etc.? How exactly the details are, I don't know. And that's another discussion. But so there is a solution if they are looking towards where the chazan is. So then they would also be mitzaref. But it is more straightforward that there should be 10 people in the one room. Let's move on. Here, same person asking that in some circles, before the Baal Habayis makes hamotzi at the Shabbos table, so he says Birshus, and he's asking why he has not seen this in Chabad. And apparently this concept of saying Birshus is written in Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so here we have in Siman Kuf Samach Zayin, the upper quote is from the Shulchan Aruch, which has the Mishnah Berurah at the bottom, but this is in the Shulchan Aruch itself, in Sif Yud Daled, and talking about breaking bread, B'tzias Hapas, and talking about who should be given the honor, Koyin, Tamad Chochem, etc. Balabais. Then it says towards the end of Sif Yud Daled, if amongst the various diners there is the Balabais, the host, then the Balabais, he should be the one to break bread, even if one of the guests is more prominent than the Balabais, an honorable personality, but because he is the host, so he should be making the hamotzi. And then he says, before saying hamotzi and breaking bread, he should say, with permission of my teachers, my masters. So here we have this idea of, before making hamotzi, saying birshus. The Alter Rebbe in the same location in Siman Kuf Samach Zayin, just in a moment, we'll see if it is. Sif Yud Tes. So Alter Rebbe brings this Indian, and he says the following: Omidas anovohi she'af shehabitzeya hu hagodol. Even when the one breaking bread is indeed the senior of that group of people, nevertheless, noitel reshus mikol bnei chabura, he requests permission from the rest of the group. He starts off by saying, I'm doing so with the permission of my masters, as if to say, well, you are more prominent than myself. And really you should be making the bracha, the opening bracha, but you kindly allowed me to take the lead. So we have here this idea of, before making hamotzi on behalf of a group, then to open with the words rishus. In the notes in the current edition of the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, the editor writes the following: Nowadays, at least in Chabad, it's common that when Balabais will make hamotzi, the other men present, when even though they get just a piece of the Lechem Mishnah, they will say their own bracha hamotzi. There's a well-known letter of the Rebbe about this, as someone asks the Rebbe that he's seen this custom in Anash, that people take their own piece, and how are they fulfilling the idea of Lechem Mishnah if they are not making a bracha over 2 loaves? And the Rebbe quotes the B'Chocherov. We've discussed this once in one of the shiurim, and that the point is that Lechem Mishnah, so long as the setting, and you were there at the beginning of the setting, so long as the setting started with Lechem Mishnah, even though you are making your own hamotzi on your own slice of bread, that's okay. And your own slice of bread from the Lechem Mishnah. Why do we make our own bracha? Well, we are less focused than perhaps in previous generations. And therefore, the worry is that when the balabais is making hamotzi, the other people around the table are not necessarily focusing properly. And therefore, instead of being yotze from his hamotzi, they make their own hamotzi. And therefore, for those assembled who are going to make their own bracha, there's no need to make this announcement of birshus, because they're going to make their own bracha. It's only when you are being motzi the others. So it could be in other circles. They still keep this minhag of the balabais making the bracha, and everyone is a yotze from his bracha. Therefore, you wouldn't need to. Therefore, they would use the prefacing of birshus me'erev rabbis. Now, what about the Ezras Noshim, the women folk in my own home? I make hamotzi, and my wife, etc., are yotze from my bracha. It's a separate discussion. They don't make their own hamotzi. But on the other hand, I don't ask birshus, because that is the way that's the done thing in a frum family, that it's the balabais who makes the hamotzi at the table, and therefore I don't need to say birshus, because that is the expected thing to do. Let's go to one more question, and that is, yesterday morning I was in the shul, and I must say it's gratifying. I meet a lot of people saying that they are regular listeners of the shiur, so it's very encouraging. And by the way, if you're interested, there's also, if you want to buy the book, there are 3 volumes of the Nesivim B'Shtei HaShlichos, which were written very much for assistance for shluchim particularly. So if any shluchim or wives of shluchim are listening, if they want to take something home for reading over Shabbos, especially where you can't go online, so in the bookstores here, there's the volumes of the Nesivim B'Shtei HaShlichos. Baruch Hashem, we reprinted the first volume totally anew a couple of years ago, so they are available. Just a plug for those for it. But coming back to so one of Ingerman comes over to me, he's a sofer, and he's discussing with me about these huge mezuzahs. I'm sure some of you have seen these oversized mezuzahs, talking about 30 inches high or something, large, very large mezuzahs. 30 inches, no, sorry, to about 30 centimeters. But you can see, I was just noticing, there's also some huge mezuzahs. And I'm not being a sofer, so some of the, I wasn't aware of the challenges, which perhaps we'll discuss in a moment. But meanwhile, he's asking a technical question. There is, on the one hand, the mezuzah should be within the first tefach. It should be from the outside. This is written in the Gemara. We've discussed this once before at the shiur. The mezuzah should be b'tefach hasamuch Rosh Hashanah, and even in interior doors, we discussed how it should be near the beginning of the doorway. There's another issue that mezuzah should be placed diagonally. And the reason why we do that, there's two opinions in Rishonim. The Gemara says about a mezuzah should not be placed like a bolt. So what does it mean, a bolt? Does a bolt mean vertical or horizontal? You can have a bolt going horizontal, and then you can have a bolt going to the floor. And so as a result, we have here a machlokas Rashi Tosfos, whether the mezuzah should be vertical or should be horizontal. In order to make them both, I don't know, happy, but at least heeded to some degree. So the minhag is to put the mezuzah in diagonal. So usually that's not such a challenge. It can be a diagonal, and still the whole diagonal is sort of within a tefach. But once you have these huge mezuzahs, so if you place them on a diagonal, it's almost inevitable that the upper part of the mezuzah is going to be beyond the first tefach. And so here's the question. When there is the emphasis of the mezuzah being in the outer tefach, does that also mean the whole mezuzah, or does it mean even if the beginning of the mezuzah is in the outer tefach? So the same Gemara later, he sent me a copy of this sefer, which I've never seen before. It's obviously a contemporary sefer called Ogur Ba'alecho, which is focusing on Hilchos Mezuzah. And he writes, Nero, that even if part of the mezuzah is in the outer tefach, that's also adequate. Now, in the note, which you also have on the screen, he says there's two reasons given why the mezuzah should be in the outer tefach. One is, in the Gemara in Menachos Lamed Gimel, that as you come, you should encounter the mezuzah, the first thing. So therefore, if you encounter the bottom of the mezuzah in the first tefach, that's also good. What's the difference? I mean, you're in any case, you're not reading the mezuzah because it's rolled closed. So that's one reason. Well, so yifka, you encounter, confront, the first thing you can. So even if you confront the bottom of the mezuzah, that's fine. Then there's another reason given that the mezuzah should protect, and it should protect even from the first tefach, the entire house from beyond the first tefach. So he's suggesting also that, does it mean that shmira is from the entire mezuzah? Possibly that the shmira is also from where the mezuzah, for the bottom of the mezuzah, that's going to be adequate to, although he's not so confident about this other explanation. And he quotes from Shevet Halevi, who says that you can rely on the fact that the bottom of the mezuzah is within the outer tefach. This is as much as I've managed to research for the moment. I'm sure there's more to it. But what I found very interesting is the one who discussed this with me is a sofer, and he says there is a halacha that the Shem Yud-Kei Vav-Kei should be written in an immediate sequence, not to have to pause to dip the quill into the ink between letters of the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which Yud-Kei Vav-Kei appears several times in the mezuzah. Now, practically speaking, on a regular writing, or regular sized letters, you can write Yud-Kei Vav-Kei with one dip of the quill. But if you have these supersized mezuzahs, so you need to have much more ink. And the likelihood is that even after one or two letters, so you're going to have to re-dip the quill into the ink. And that raises a question whether, I'm sure that it's kosher, but whether it's considered a hidur mitzvah. So whilst generally, is there a hidur to have a larger lulav, to have a larger esrog, to have larger halachic candles? Is there a mitzvah? Is bigger better? There may be some value in that. But here, the bigger has also got its technical challenges, that it would mean that the writing of the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei would not be able to be in an immediate sequence. And that may raise a question, is it indeed a hidur? So that was something which was totally new to me, and I found it very interesting. I thought I'd share it with you. With this, I'm going to wish you, again, a good Shabbos, and we should meet in good health, Simchas Olam al Rosham, and have the Hakel with Mashiach Tzidkenu in Beis Hamikdash, B'meir Yameinu. Amen.